Welcome y'all to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah, and if this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that you return for future episodes and new content on the Identity Talk Network. And if you are a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, I welcome you back, and I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and of course, insightful. So before we introduce our newest guest, just a reminder for folks who are on YouTube, make sure you hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications for new episodes. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. So make sure you subscribe there as well, wherever that is. And for those who want to help us continue to build this Identity Talk network, we do accept monetary donations on both Cash App and Venmo. So if you're on Cash App, our handle is $IDTALK4ED. And if you are on Venmo, our handle is at KwameSM. That's at symbol KWAMESM. And to check out previous episodes of the podcast, you can go to our main website at IdentityTalk4Educators.com. Thank you kindly. So, listen, y'all. Today's episode is one that I am just so excited about because, obviously, I get excited for every guest who comes on this platform because they're just dope in what they do. But this brother that's coming on is somebody who is really inspiring a lot of school leaders and principals to follow their gut, especially in the midst of this great resignation, in the midst of COVID-19, where we've had a lot of educator turnover, not just teacher turnover, but overall educator turnover. We've seen principals resign and go into early retirement. We've seen the same trend with teachers, even some paraprofessionals. We've seen even pre-service teachers reroute their career trajectories and say, you know what, maybe I need to go into a different profession or industry altogether. So the past 3 years, we've seen all that happening. But this brother has really been transparent about his journey. If you follow him on LinkedIn, you already have a sense of what I'm talking about in terms of just his health, in terms of some of the forces that have been imposed on him, in terms of just maintaining his effectiveness as a school leader, but also struggling to balance that life with being a father, being a family man, being a husband, things that I myself have had to navigate and create an equilibrium with during my own educator career. So I'm excited. And also, it's rare to have a Ghanaian American and Nigerian American talking on the same platform. Usually there's always beef, but I promise you this time around it's going to be all love. But without further ado, I want to bring on the good brother, Mr. Uche Njoku, to the podcast to talk with us about his journey and what he's doing now. So let's bring the brother on. Yes, sir.
What's good? What's good?
How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. Feeling good. Listen, I just want to start by saying one thing first. Nigerian jollof rice. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say.
I was going to bring it up at the end, but you want to start with the heat already. Okay. Nah, we not going to do that, bro. We're not going to do that. We all know where the best jollof rice is, but we'll table that conversation for later. We'll table it. But man, it's good to have you on. So for the listeners and viewers, just to give us a little context, I actually met Uche a few years back. It was at a CAUSEBOT conference in Detroit, if I'm not mistaken. I was out there selling books and, sharing about my consulting company, which was pretty young at the time. And I know you were out there still as a principal at your school in New York, just being an attendee. So we connected for a brief moment, and fast forward to, I don't know, 3-4 years later, here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are
Yeah.
talking. So yeah, it's good to be in the same space with you. And man, I don't know if you realize how many people you've inspired, particularly on LinkedIn with your story and just your post. You're so open and transparent and vulnerable in your commentary. So uh we'll I guess we'll table that for later on. But before we get there, let's start from the beginning, because before you were a teacher, you were growing up. Um, Nigerian household. So we know how it is, West African household, how some of the traditions are and how that impacted our first generation experience. So talk to me a little bit about that and what brought you into the education field.
Yes. First of all, again, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here on Identity Talk. Um, and so, what brought me to education? It's funny because I feel like I spent so much time trying to avoid education. Um, my family, I was born in Nigeria. My family came to America, like many immigrant families, for better opportunity. And my first like my first experience that hit me hard was in school here in America. Because you have to imagine coming to America from another country, the accent, and this is the 80s. So you got all the jokes, African booty scratching and everything else. And for a lot of kids, the first impression of an African they ever had was from TV. This is the 80s. So this is when Ethiopia was going through its famine. So, we are the world. That was what the world, at least in America, knew about Africans. So um at that time, I think I was either second or third. I came like second grade, end of second grade into third grade. And in third grade, I remember my teacher called my mom into school to talk to her. And she told my mother that her words exactly, I will never forget, is that your son is retarded. But it wasn't as an insult. Because back then, that was part of the canon of labels for for students with disabilities. So
Right.
mental retardation. So at that point in time, I just remember being as a kid, just being like, okay, I heard kids using that term as an insult on the playground. So I'm looking at this teacher like, what's going on here? Mind you, I'm in third grade, about 8 years old. My mom, being West African, being just an African woman, period, in a strange land, she sat there quietly and she took it in, and I remember we got home and I think she called my uncle what the case is. I remember her crying, and because if you know anything about African families, we don't play with our kids. Our kids, that is our purpose of existence. So to be told that something's wrong with your child is a big problem. And I think the next day I was in school. I was in a special classroom. I was in the world changed. I was no longer in regular class. I was in special classes. We'd wrapped up the school year, and my mother decided, for reasons mostly having to do with just our economic space that we were in as a family at the time. And I'm sorry, this was in Los Angeles. This is where we moved to. And
Okay.
these were tough. So my mom and dad decided that, and again, a lot of African families know, a lot of immigrant families, a lot of African families know about this. My parents decided to split the family. Like, my father would stay in America and we would go back to Nigeria, but it'd be a little bit easier for us in Nigeria. And he would work and try to get things settled down and bring us back. We went to Nigeria, and when we got there, mama, I already had this label, it was already out there that something was wrong with me. So my mother decided, like, listen, we're gonna put you in school. Mind you, Nigeria, there is no special ed classes.
Nope.
Every kid is in regular classes, and you either sink or swim. That's how it is. And I remember by this time I'm in the fourth grade, and after the first set of exams, what they do is you get your grades, and then they rank you. They don't play. They rank you. They put your rank in front of for everybody to
Oh,
see.
I've been there. Oh yeah.
So so out of I think it was like 44 kids or 43 kids, I was 42 or 43. I was the one kid above the kid in the bottom. And the last thing you want to do in Nigeria, people will ask you, what is your place in your class?
Yeah.
And you want to be first, top 10. I was second to last. My mother was like, nope, we're not having this. So this woman, took every additional resource we had and hired all my teachers to be my tutors at home. So all the teachers that I had it was for the main three subjects: math, science, history, and English. They came to my house, one on Monday, one on Tuesday, one on Thursday, so one Wednesday, one on Thursday, and sat and were there around through dinner and tutored me every day. So it's bad enough I got to see these dudes in school. Then they're in my house eating our food too. But my mother was not paying. She put everything she had in there. She fed these. My teachers were all men. So and that had a huge impact on me too. They were all men. And she fed them, she paid them, and they tutored me. By the end of fifth grade, so that was fourth grade going to fifth grade. By the time I finished primary 5, I was number 2 in the class, and I missed number 1 by 1 point. And what was interesting is the belief that my mother had in my abilities, that these teachers, these men who they didn't care what they said in America, like you special what? You will learn how to write, you will learn how to read, you will learn how to do this math problems. And they pushed me through that. So at the end of our fourth grade, we take the common entrance exam. I don't know if it's the same in Ghana, but most countries that were under the British rule, you have the common entrance exams. I took the exam, scored really high. Same. Okay. So I took the exams and I ended up attending Air Force Military School in Nigeria, which at the point in time, it was the number 1 school in Nigeria. So I got into that school. So think about this. In third grade, I'm retarded. And now here I am going to high school or secondary school, and I'm going to attend one of the top schools. And I was there for into my second year. Then my parents decided, okay, we're going to come back to America. I was given the choice to stay in Nigeria and finish my schooling, or go back to America. And I chose to come back with my family. So I came back here, and we ended up back in California. We were in Inglewood, California, and I went to Latahira Middle School to rap. So okay, I went to Latahira Middle School. When I got there, they actually put me back because again, these stereotypes. You're coming from Africa, or whatever. So you might not be able to perform as well. So they put me back 1 year. So I was in 6th grade. Which I should have been going into. I should have been in the 7th. So they put me back in the 6th grade, which was Form 1 in Nigeria.
Form 1.
For second. Yep. So they threw me there. And I remember sitting in class being very confused. Like, why am I in this class? Like, is this a joke? Because I felt like these kids I'm sitting with, they don't know how to do this stuff. So we're talking about like just math, especially in math. So I remember one day, Miss White, who was my math teacher, she's so we're doing long division in the classroom. So she's putting the division problems on the board.
Sure.
And this in Nigeria, your times table. Like if you don't know your times table, you will be brutalized. You better know 1 times 1 or 12 times 12. But once you memorize that, you can do multiplicities of those numbers because it's just, factors. So I'm sitting in class doing these division problems, and I'm just writing it on a paper. I'm not a genius. I just have the table memorized. So I can work it out in my head. And she was like, why don't you show your work? Show your work. I didn't understand that. What do you mean show your work? Do I have the right answer? But in Nigeria, it's all about speed. But we'll see the work. You have the right answer. And you explain how you get the answer. So I'm sitting there and she's first of all befuddled. Like, how is he doing the math problems? So she puts another math problem on the paper. I'm like, I do it and get it right. So she grabs the textbook. The kids are all working independently, and we start going through the book. And it took about 2 days. And we went through the 6th grade book. We went through the 7th grade book. I didn't get stopped until we got into the 8th, like midway through 8th grade. And she was like, okay, you don't belong in this class. And the other thing too, in Nigeria, we don't really have kindergarten. If your child is able to work, you start school. There's no barrier.
Pretty much.
So technically, based on I was already ahead. I was already like younger, a year younger, or the same age as the kids in my class. But she's sitting there, she's looking at the math problem. She's like, okay, you don't belong in this class, but the work shows that you should be in the 8th grade. So she called my father in. So we spoke to the principal, Miss Washington, who, interestingly enough, was Michael Jackson's aunt. So Michael Jackson's brother was married to her daughter. So it's another weird, coincidence.
Wait,
so,
the king.
So yeah, so I think Randy, it was either Randy or Marlon. One of those two is married to my principal's daughter. So, but so they bring my father in. They sat down there and they're like, we want to move your son to the next to 8th grade. And African parents, they're not asking like, so, oh my God, what about his emotional state? He was, of course, move him. So the next day, I'm in the 8th grade and I'm smaller. I'm younger by like a year and a half to 2 years than everybody else. And that was like, okay, this interesting path now was put in. So I literally, one day I was in the 6th grade. The next day I was in the 8th grade. Dang. And then, and I think I had a semester left to graduate. So I graduated from middle school, going to high school, and I did really well in high school, played football, and academically graduated top 10. I did really well. Applied to colleges, got into all the colleges I applied to, and went to the, I ended up going to University of Rochester, upstate New York, and did my thing there. It wasn't as, when I got to college, the path wasn't as straight as it was for a lot of people. I got to college and a lot of family issues and just also being really young, and being away from home for the first time. I made a lot of poor choices and things like that. And I got to college and I started college in 1993. I didn't get my degree till 2000. So you can tell that's not 4 years. So I at some point in time, I left college, went to the military because I was just, okay, I was gonna put it out there. I was really messing up. I was the freedom of being in college was way too much for me to handle. And what ended up happening was I got to the point where the college was like, listen, academic probation, you might have to leave school. And when they told me about that, I was like, okay, I have two choices. I can go home. My father will kill me, but he will kill me. And I was like, I can't go home. No, this man, no, I can't. So I opted to join the Marine Corps instead. How crazy is that? Like, I either go home with my father, have me, or I go to the Marine. So I was
that's real.
I was ordered to sign myself up. So those of you who are watching who have African parents or you're African, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You don't play with it. And even I knew I had messed up. So I went to the Marines. Fortunately, when I was there, unfortunately and unfortunately, but more fortunately, I got injured and came back out. And that short time in the Marine Corps really, it's training me out. Like, it tapped into something in me. And I was like, okay, I gotta get serious. Because again, mind you, this young kid in college who's wilding out, nobody's telling you what to do, and you're partying and doing all these different things. You're in the Marines, and guess what? You're following orders. Structure is in there. And I was running away from my father because I knew for him it's all about structure. But then I thought going to the Marines was going to be like G.I. Joe, going to go have some fun. Instead, what ended up happening is I got what my father would have given me from the Marine Corps, and I came out and got myself back together. Eventually graduated, and after I graduated, I went into corporate sales, and a lot of it was just me just now as a man trying to figure out my life. I did well in corporate sales, but then I was like, you know what? I didn't feel satisfied in that space. Because again, being African and having parents who expect one of three things from you: doctor,
engineer. Yep.
And for my father threw in pilot in there. When I was in military school, he was like, you could become a pilot. But those three things. And it's funny how much of that is really ingrained in you, because it's this notion of I have to succeed on a high level. And I didn't feel like I was succeeding on a high enough level to make my parents proud of me. So I decided I was going to do law school. So I applied to law school. I got into a law school in California. and they would remain unnamed because it's a good school. But what happened was my family was like, "You're not going to go there. That's trash." So I don't want to disrespect anyone who went to that law school. In my opinion, it's a really good school. But my parents were like, no, 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 no. If you're going to go to law school, they got to be the UCLAs, USCs, the Stanfords. Like, it has to be something of excellence.
Sure.
So my aunt was an attorney, is an attorney. And she was like, listen, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take the LSATs again. We're going to create a plan, and we're going to get you into one of those top tier schools. But she's like, but in the meantime, you got to do something that sets you apart in service to the community. And my corporate job wasn't really service to my community. It was me making money. So she was like, it could be anything. And I was like, what about teaching? And again, for me, it just sounded good. Like, teaching in the community, people see,
Sure.
like, how much, it's a great, humble thing to do. So at the time, LA was not hiring. There was a hiring freeze in Los Angeles. And I'm a little bit OCD. When I have something in my head, I have to run through that thing. So I decided, okay, I got to find somewhere to teach. I had gone to college in New York. I had friends in New York, and one of my friends said, "Hey, they're hiring teachers in New York City. It's a shortage, and there's a program called New York City Teaching Fellows. You should apply for it." I bet. I applied for it. I didn't get in, and I was like, "Okay, I guess I'm just gonna try to find something else to do." And I remember I had gone to DC with my family for it was like an African family reunion for
Sure.
our community. It was happening in DC, and I went there, had a great time. Came back in the mail. It was a letter from the teaching fellow saying, "Hey, yeah, we didn't accept you the first time around, but would you still be interested?" And I was like, "Heck yeah, because it's part of the plan. I'm going to be teaching." So within 2 weeks of getting that letter, I was in New York City, and honestly, in my head, it was all about law school, and teaching was going to be that thing on my resume. That was going to get me to USC or UCLA or Stanford.
Sure.
And I came to New York, and in the teaching fellows, which is a great program. It takes people from other career fields, and to fill in the gap of that short in teacher, and in that shortage of teachers. So I get in. I start interviewing in schools, but they don't place you. You still got to go in for interviews, and principals have to hire you.
Sure.
And I remember Scott Goldner, principal at Discovery High School in the Bronx. And wherever you are, Scott, thank you so much, because you put me on a path that I didn't imagine for myself. We interviewed, and I was supposed to be a special ed teacher, in the Bronx. And at the end of our interview, he said, "Listen, I like you. I'm going to give you a position." But he said to me, "I look at you. I see in your resume, you were in the Marines, right?" I was like, "Yes." He was like, "Okay, how do you feel about discipline?" I was like, "It's necessary." He's like, "Okay, I have a little problem here. My AP is going on maternity leave, and I need a dean." And I didn't even know what a dean was. I knew what a dean was in college, but in California, we didn't have deans in California. So I what does that mean? He's like, "No, you're going to be handling discipline for the school." I was like, "But bro, I'm a first year teacher, right? like I know nothing." The last time I was in a high school, I was a student, so I know nothing about that. He was like, "Nah, you get a hang of it. You're in the Marines, you can handle this." And he made me his dean. So my first day on the job, I was the dean of a high school. And he also told me, "Don't tell anybody." He was, "Don't tell anybody. They don't need to know that you're a first year teacher." I was like, what is going on here? But it was like all the stars aligned itself. Mind you, I was a special ed kid who was told, I was a kid who was told that he was special ed, that he needed a lot of supports. And then I was also the same kid who got the supports and proved everybody wrong. Served in the military, and the most important part, I grew up in LA, and this is the 80s and 90s.
Oh yeah.
Crips and gangbang and all that. So I
Rodney
played
King,
football.
all that.
Right? I was in high school. It was the LA riots. I was there it was my 11th grade year. I was right in the middle of it. My mother owned an African store in the Crenshaw district.
Oh wow.
So yeah, all that was my world. So here I am in the Bronx now, and at this high school. And the first thing they told me is, "There's a gang problem here. We have a serious gang problem." And I was like, "Okay, so tell me more." They're like, "Yeah, between the Bloods and the Crips and the Latin Kings." And I was like, wait a minute. You got Bloods and Crips in the same building? How's that possible?" Because again, I'm from LA. Bloods and Crips run entire neighborhoods. My high school was all Bloods. So I didn't like this whole notion of like gangs mixing each other, but it was a blessing that I grew up in LA, because here I am as a dean of a school where there's a gang problem. And as soon as the kids heard Mr. Njoku is from LA, when I told you, I had kids standing around me in my office as though I was like the oracle of gangs. They were like, "Mister, tell us about LA." And it's funny how their need to really further live into that lifestyle of being gang banging allowed me to get into their heads and talk to them about like, yo, but that's not necessary. So
Right.
as a teen, the way I grew up ended up aiding me in really building relationships and moving the school forward. And from that point, I became a little bit of a celebrity in that building, because people didn't understand how our incidences went from like being 400 a year before to being less than 150 the following year, and it kept on going down. And from there, that first job as a dean, I had a principal who reached out to me and said, "Listen, I really want you to come to my school. I see what you do over here. I think you can help me over here." And circumstances allowed for me to move to that school, and that principal became the principal who made me an AP, 4 years later. And from that point, my career just kind of like went to the moon. I was a
Wow.
Cahn guy that ended up going to Columbia for the kid who was a special ed kid and dropped out of college. Really, I dropped out of college to go to the military. Ended up at teaching college, Columbia University, getting my master's in leadership, and here I am now. My career just went. I know that was a long story, but you can't ask me that. You can't ask me how you got here, because it's really complex. But yeah.
Man, brother, there's so many parallels between your journey and mine, because both my parents, they're from Ghana. I grew up in the States and attended school from kindergarten to 6th grade in the States. I started my first 4 years as a student with an IEP. So I was in the self-contained special education classroom. So I dealt with the same issues you did. I knew I was smarter than most. But, I had some learning challenges, but not to the extent where I should have been in that placement. And my mother was my advocate. She was the one who was going to the IEP meetings, telling the teachers and the departments what intervention she was putting in place, because whatever they were doing at the school was not effective and wasn't bringing the results that was needed. But then when my mom was working with me, that's when all that changed. So what's crazy is I eventually get mainstream by the time I get to 5th grade. After 6th grade, I moved to Ghana with my family, and I did Form 1 through 3 in Ghana, and even took the basic education certificate exam, the BC. So that's
Wow.
like the entry exam to go into high school, which they call SSS, senior secondary school, in like West Africa, right? I come back and literally I go to this predominantly white school where the principal is trying to put me in a special education classroom because they figure, oh, you're from Africa, you must be behind. So the bias kicks in right there. My mom's trying to tell him that I used to go to school in America, so I already know the system. I'm not new to the system. I just took some time away to be in Ghana. And so even though they didn't make me stay back, I ended up taking general classes as opposed to honors classes, AP classes. So that's how they demoted me, by putting me in like the lowest possible level of classes that's mainstream. And I had to work my way back to where I was supposed to be. So it was it was crazy. But everything you said about being in West Africa, the testing, the rankings, I was in a class of 50 students. I was in the middle of the pack. There was a relegation line for those who, if you were below that relegation line, your behind was in trouble.
Yeah.
and they would cane you. They would cane you too. Every teacher had a
I
cane at that
didn't want to
time.
talk about that, but yeah.
Mid to late 90s, every teacher had a cane. Or here in the States, if you're in the South, you probably call it a switch. They had it. Every teacher had that back when I was
So
going to school there.
we had what it called the Hausas called it koboko, which was
Koboko.
a leather, it was a leather whip. They used to whip donkeys, and they
Yes.
basically take that to our behinds, and sometimes to our heads. Like, so it was crazy.
Yeah. But we're not going to bring all that up because that's just triggering. I know it is for me when I bring it up, but it's
Yeah.
real. And being here in Sierra Leone, a lot of these things still happen today, even though there's anti-corporal punishment laws that are in place here. There's still teachers who are old school, and they'll beat on their students if they get a wrong answer to a question, which is traumatizing, especially when you think about social emotional learning, which is now something that they're talking about here, but they're still very much behind in those conversations and implementing that in schools. But that's a whole nother conversation. I do want to talk about just your time as a principal, because there are a lot of things that principals go through when they're leading their schools. So just thinking to your experience, what do you believe are some of the common errors that school leaders make when they're leading their schools that can get them into trouble?
So, okay, I just heard two questions. What are the most common mistakes that school leaders make when they lead in their schools? And what
Yeah,
are common
that's the
mistakes they
question.
make that can lead them into trouble? But I feel like those are two different things.
Okay, the first question.
Okay, so you have to have a very strong, and for me, this is non-negotiable, a very strong sense of your educational philosophy. When you go through leadership programs, it's one of the first courses you take talking about educational philosophy, even in teacher education programs. But that's a real thing. What is it that you believe in education? Because once you get in that school, you have the power to shift a whole entire community in either the right direction, the wrong direction, or in no direction. And a lot of that comes down to what is it that you believe yourself about what your responsibility is and what do you want to see for that community. And too often I come across school leaders that literally don't have that. All they know is this is my job. And for me, if you are leading a school, because I'm sorry, if you are working in a school and you're the principal and it's your job, you should not be a principal. That's my personal opinion. You should not be a principal, because being in education and leading a school community is not a job. To me, it is your work.
Right.
The same way in the Bible it says, if man does not work, he should not eat. That level of this is what you do, who you are. That's very, very important coming into a school space. And a lot of educators don't do that. They come in there and they're like, okay, I'm waiting for central office. I'm waiting for the district to tell me what to do. And again, I mean, if you want to keep a job, you want to definitely make sure you're in alignment with the district or system policies. But you as an individual, you have the power to bring something to a school community that is uniquely you. Because when you're the principal, it's what people say. Hey, that's Uche's school. Okay, I've never owned a school in my life, but that's the perception. It is your school. I remember the other day I was driving past my first school as principal in the Bronx. I was driving by and there's this huge banner. It's like 60 by 30. I mean, it's crazy. It's the size of the building. And I drove by and I smiled because I was the one who had that banner put up. And people told me I was crazy. And I was like, because I need the community to know what did we stand for as a school that's in your neighborhood. So the mission and vision of the school is plastered there very clearly. Guess what happened the next year? There was a line outside the door of parents trying to get the kids into the school.
Wow.
Because for me, branding was very important. For me, making sure that student had voice was very important. What we were doing for our Black and brown boys, and that was why you saw me at Coachbach very important, because I was a black boy who went through nonsense in my education as a child. So those things are very, very important to me. So every year as a principal, every school I've led 2 schools, even as an AP, I had a very strong sense of like, this is what we're here to do, and I made sure my staff knew this, my parents knew this, and my superintendent knew this, because I wasn't waiting for them to tell me. I was like, this is what I'm doing. And 100% of the time, they were like, oh, we got you. But I had that strong sense. But a lot of school leaders, they get scared. What if I'm wrong? Okay, what if you're wrong? But if you're going to lead, it's like in the military, go into battle. You don't go into battle scared and say, maybe this plan might not work. You go in there, you could be committed, like, okay, we're boarding the boats. We're here. So there's no other option but to win this battle. And that's a sense that a lot of school leaders a lot don't have. And it's not because they can't do it. It's fear. It's fear a lot of times. And there's some leaders out there who've been burnt doing that. But for me, I wouldn't do it any other way. Like for me, if as a leader, I have to have a very strong sense. And if you think about this, those schools that have those legendary school leaders, the school where the school ends up being named after that principal, is because that person did something that was unapologetic and saying, no, this is who we are going to be. And that's something that's very, very important that a lot of leaders need. I would like to see more leaders living in that space. But that's how you change systems. And that's how you empower communities.
Yeah. I think the misconception that's out there about a lot of school leaders is that you have to not shake the status quo. You have to just play it safe in order to stay in that principal seat. So when you mention fear, what immediately comes to my mind is just all the tests that we do. You're in New York, so you're probably looking at regents and how students are performing. And that may even play a role in whether or not you still maintain a job as a principal. And that's part of your criteria that shows whether or not you're being effective in your role. So do you feel like a lot of the fear comes from expectations set by districts, superintendent, and other higher officials?
That's a good question. Whether the fear stems from those external expectations. But the thing is, those expectations are always going to be there.
Sure.
They're going to be there. I'm going to speak for high schools across the country, because for middle and elementary schools, it varies a little bit, but for high schools is generally the same. How is a good high school identified generally across the country? Graduation rate.
That's right.
Not necessarily how literate the kids are, how many of them are graduating. Okay, let's be honest here. I know for a fact there are systems across the country that fudge those numbers. Let's be honest here. I could give kids the most basic of classes and just make sure they just do the barest minimum and pass with 65s to graduate.
Oh, you're right.
But listen, I'm going to give you a real example, and you can look this up. You can call the school right now. John Jay School for Law, the school I was principal of last year. Coming out of the pandemic, coming back out of the pandemic into the building, 100% of our graduating seniors got into college. 100% of the graduating seniors. And let me qualify that. College or some post-secondary institution, but those are kids who got into trade schools. And that's where they wanted to go. And let's be honest, sometimes the kids going to trade schools end up becoming our bosses. Because real talk. But the thing was, my expectation was, I was very clear to my college counselor. I was very clear to the senior staff. I was clear to the students and their parents. I don't want to hear, I'm not applying to college. You will apply to college, and you will get in. If it's a community college, if it's NYU, if it's city college, it doesn't matter what it is. You will get into college. But no, that expectation also is standing upon the belief that my kids are capable and able to get into those institutions, which means I'm standing on the belief that my teachers are doing their jobs to educate my students so they're capable of applying to get into those colleges. They also believe that is also now, I'm standing on the foundation. My teachers are on the same page with me and believe that this is what we want for our kids in the school. So now, name one district superintendent or district person or someone from Central who's going to be like, "Oh, Uche, you're wrong with that. We don't want that to happen." So I didn't wait for them to come tell me that this is what we need to do. If anything, a lot of school systems around the country were saying, coming out of the pandemic, we got to be softer and nicer. The kids have gone through a lot. Yeah, we all went through a lot. But it doesn't change the fact that once they graduate, they have to go into a world that's still the world that killed George Floyd. The world still, that we still have to say Black Lives Matter.
That's right.
So my thing is I gotta make sure that I tell my students all the time, my job is to make sure that you leave the school with the tools that you need to conquer. I don't need you to survive in. I need you to go out there and conquer, make a place for yourself in this world. So that belief, anyone can have that belief. And yes, the fear, but I'll tell you this one thing about the fear. The fear is the same fear that we all have when we start a new job, when we come into a new experience. But then my question is, why do some people we all come in, when you start a new job, a new space, you move to a new country, there's that sense of like, oh man, this is anxiety, right? But some people thrive and some people just go back, pack their bags and go back home. There's something in you that has to say, like, listen, I got it. Like, listen, this is not negotiable for me. My belief is so strong what needs to happen right now. And that's the thing. We have to stop allowing the system to be the reasons that we don't do what we need to do. And I'll tell you one thing that I said my whole entire career. I believe strongly, I believe so much in what I do that I'm willing to get fired. Because I'm good with getting fired if I know what I'm doing is the right thing.
That's right.
If you're gonna fire me because I'm doing some dumb nonsense, okay, that's on me. That's my fault. Like, for example, the example I gave, I was like 100% of my kids are going to go to college. They're going to get accepted to college. Let me make sure that was very clear. They're going to get accepted. But I told my students, I need you to have a choice. Graduating with no college, no job, no nothing, that's not a choice. But you have the college letter of acceptance, that's a choice. I had kids who said, you know what, mister, I'm going to the military. All right. But what were your choices? The Army, Penn State, it's a bunch of other colleges. So if you decide you're going to go to the Army, I'm not mad at you. You had all the options in front of you. You were like, you know what, right now, I don't think I'm ready for college. So I spoke to them, and they're going to defer my acceptance for a year or two. So I'm going to go to the Army. I can't be mad at that. I can't be mad at that. But the most important thing is that I remember when I sat down with my AP, who's now the principal, and I was like, bro, this is the vision for this year, for my senior class. Because not only that, it's going to make a statement to all the other kids who are going to be like, wait a minute, we just came out of a pandemic and all of them got into college? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So fear is always going to be there, but what are you going to do beyond to get past it?
Man, you preaching, brother. But the one part that you really got me with was the fact that, we know why we got into education. We knew going into this field that there were going to be challenges. We knew that the pay wasn't going to be what it was going to be. We knew that we would have to deal with some parents that could be challenging. We know that there's some forces within our school systems that can make our jobs more difficult than they should be. This is no knowledge before we even step foot into the classroom, at least for you and I. So when these things happen, it's no surprise. I think about Abbott Elementary. If people follow Abbott Elementary, when they talk about how, we don't get all the facilities and all the resources, but we find a way. We persist because we believe in the kids. We do what's best for the kids. And that's what I'm hearing in your message, is just that, okay, they're not going to give us this. We don't have that. We still have to maintain high expectations, not only for the kids, but for us as professionals, because if we don't set the example, our kids don't have a template that will allow them to thrive in whatever they decide to do.
And I'm going to add one more thing to that.
Yes.
So, I know that you don't feel me on this one. Our ancestors,
come on,
they had to do to even allow us to be where we are right now.
Yes.
The man whose name is my last name, Njoku, was one of 4 brothers during colonial times, and it's fun. The things that he did then is still legendary to this day. Who refused to bow to the queen? Who refused to let the colonizers like tell him how he was going to be? He was known as a troublemaker. So to this day, whenever you hit the Njoku family, the Njoku clan in our community in Nigeria, they're like, oh, that's that trouble family. And I never knew what it was. It's big, and until my uncle told me the story, like, no, that was your great grandfather who was wilding. And then guess what? You stand here because of him. My brother, in this country, school for Black folk was under a tree in the woods. This was illegal. So for me, to sit in a classroom with a smart board with seats and everything there, and also know the things that are still happening here, like it's not just about getting the diploma. It's not just about graduating. It's about a response to a historical wrong that's still happening. And that's what education is. It's a response to a historical wrong. So like, I don't play with that. Like I tell my students, I mean, I don't have students anymore to tell, but I've always told my students, you have to understand why are you here and who did what they had to do to create the path for you to one day be staying in this classroom. Because once upon a time, and not too long ago, it was illegal. It was a matter of law for you to learn how to read and write. And those are so for me, it's like I'm getting amped right now because for me, it's like it's visceral in my body. Like I'm just like, yeah. And what you said, as men, as Black men as well, let me tell you something about leadership. And no, as teachers, there is no denying that when I was offered to be a dean, that my parents had a big part to do with it.
They had to have had that part.
And I don't think that principal did it intentionally, but in his mind, he probably thought, okay, this Black man, kind of cocky, military, and he can keep these kids in check. But at that point in time, I didn't see it that way. I just thought to myself, wow, I'm being given this opportunity. But now with context, I'm like, wow, I was the what was that role in the plantation? It was like let's get the biggest, blackest of them all, give him a little bit of power to control his own people. So for me, when I realized that, I was like, wow, I gotta be very careful about how I move in these spaces, and because I have to understand there's a perception about me that I can never shake off. So since I can't shake that perception off, every time I'm given an opportunity to lead, because we need him to control those children. You know what I do when I get in there? I empower those children.
There you go.
I had a professor my first year as a teacher who told me, your responsibility as an educator, she said to me, Uche, this is a white woman, she said, Uche, your responsibility as an educator is to be a subversive. I was like, what you mean by subversive? She was like, there's a lot of things they want you to do, but you're going to do what's right. not what they want you to do.
That's a jewel. That's a jewel right there. Woo. Man, this is probably gonna end up being a top 10 episode when it's all said and done. I already feel it. Um, but the reference you were making to our ancestors not being able to read or write, I mean, we're seeing a new version of Jim Crow right now as we speak, with books being banned, our history still being whitewashed, not just for Black and brown people, but for other people of color as well. You feel what I'm saying? It's still happening. So now I want to transition into what led you to ultimately leave your principalship, because you were effective for many years and you clearly had a love for the children. So then what changed? Like, what ultimately pushed you to resign from that?
There were a few factors. And I don't want to sound, I don't want to come off sounding cocky in saying this.
Sure.
I have to speak my truth. I came into education in 2005. Mind you, the intention was to do a 2-year commitment, then go to law school. Very, very simple. But as God would have it, I found my purpose within the space of education, which I mean, I guess that's what happens when you find your purpose. You're just like, whoa, this feels right. And then after that, from 2005 to 2022, 17 years, 6 schools in 2 different states, literally thousands of students that I've been connected to, hundreds of teachers. I am proud to say that I've functioned on a high level from the moment I came into the New York State Department of Education for 17 years. I didn't do like, I was in the classroom quiet and just kind of like figuring myself out. I was thrown in Front Street from day one, and I just went hard. I've taken guns from kids. I've pulled kids back into the building as I saw somebody running down the street shooting. I've had grown men run up on me, run into my playground, trying to face off with one of my students. And I'd step in front of him like, bro, what you doing? And they're going to find out the person's armed. I saw the gun from the waist belt. I'm just thinking to myself, all right, I got to manage the space right now, because I don't have the space to call the police or anything like that. So right now I got to handle this to protect this child. And this was what I've been doing for so many years. At the same time, it's not all negative. I've had students who've clerked in the Supreme Court. I've had students who are pharmacists and who are doctors and who are parents who have their own children. I had a young lady who once came to me, my second year as a teacher, and said to me, "Yo, mister, I'm a blood now." And I looked at her and said to her, "Yo, blood, what you mean by it?" She's like, "Yeah, I got put on." And I sat with her and had a heart-to-heart conversation, telling her how disappointed I was because of what I saw for her, in the short time I had known her. I didn't see her for a week. And when I saw her again, she had a black eye and a busted lip. I was like, "What happened to you?" I was like, "You got jumped?" She's like, "Nah, they jumped me." No, she did get jumped, and she got jumped out of the gang, out of the Bloods. I was like, "What?" And she was like, "What you said to me stayed stuck in my head," and I told her I couldn't do it. And I was like, "That's crazy." So you took a beating to get back out. All these little spaces of 17 years of just working at a feverish pitch to make sure that my kids in my communities with an S were being served. At some point in time, I opened my eyes and I was like, I'm married. I have 2 babies of my own. Right now, my son's 2.5 years old. My daughter's 4. And I'm still moving at a feverish pitch. I leave the house when it's dark. I come home when it's dark. The many days I come home, my children are still, like, I didn't see them in the morning. And by the time I get home, they're already in bed. And I have to ask myself, for all these of me being effective as a leader in a school, I need to be effective in the lives of my own children.
Right.
But not only that, I've always been a believer. As a leader, it is my responsibility to build other leaders. So my first school in the Bronx, where I was a principal, middle school, was the middle school, MS 318. I'm sorry, IS 318. When I decided to leave that school to go become a high school principal, my AP one of the best leaders I've ever worked with, stepped in, running that school, and doing an amazing job. Now that I decided, like, you know what, it's time for me to step away from being a principal so I can explore other things, because I'm still in education. But the level of commitment is required for me to be an effective principal is taken away from my family. And I had to make a decision in the best interest of Musa and Uche Njoku, my son and my daughter. And I did, and I have no regrets making that decision. But that's what I had to do. But at the same time, there's one other thing that I wasn't able to articulate at the time that I'm able to better articulate now. When I came into education, I was so many other things. I was a former soldier. I was in corporate sales. Then there's other things. I've always loved technology. I've always been a little bit of an artist. All these different things that defines Uche. After 17 years, I became very just, especially when I got to the principal role, just being a principal. And even though I did good at it, I feel like there's so much more that I can do. But for me to do those things, I have to now explore other spaces. And so between the family and then also just saying, like, what else can I do out here outside of the building? Because I've been a dean, I've been an AP, I've been a teacher, I've been in turnaround teams. I went to Columbia. I just finished this year as a Cahn fellow. I was a Gray fellow. I've done all these different things. But it has to be more than just what's within the walls of the school building. And a big part of it now is me exploring those spaces, and I'll be honest with you, people ask me all the time, do you miss the building? I say, I do miss it, because I've had great memories there, but it's no longer my time. There are other leaders that need to step up and I could pass the torch to, which I have done. I have passed the torch to, and are going to do phenomenal work. So now I can do other things. I'm 46 years old. I still have a lot of time, God willing, to do other things. But I have to give myself permission to go explore these other things. And too often, principals get pigeonholed and told that if you leave, your school building is going to fall apart. That the community is going to fall apart. You leave, you're selfish. Okay, let me be selfish. Because I can tell you this right now, the new principal, he doesn't feel like I'm being selfish, because now he has a chance to now move the school forward himself. It's one of those situations where you're not going to win in every. There's always going to be somebody out there who's going to say, well, what you did was inconsiderate to the school community. But at the end of the day, 17 years, I've done a lot. I've done a lot. I've done, listen, I could tell, listen, I did, right now, it just popped into my brain. I remember the one day I was at school in my office, one of the rare times that I was eating, rare. Eating, people would just be like, Mr. Njoku, you eat? We don't ever see you eat. You're always running around. I'm in my office, I had a salad. A kid ran into my office and said, Mr. Njoku, I was assistant principal at the time. She's dying. I was like, what's going on? I jumped up. This girl ran down the hall, ran behind her, ran into a room, and this young lady was on the floor. She's having a full seizure. Blood everywhere, blood everywhere. I didn't know where it was coming from. And bloodborne contagion training we all have to go through, right? At that moment in time, I'm seeing a child. I'm not asking for no gloves. I'm just like, yo, this is somebody's baby. This is one of my students. So I pick her up and I put my finger in her mouth to make sure her tongue didn't bite. I'm trying to figure out then I'm wearing a white button-down shirt and tie covered in blood, her blood, But in that moment, I'm like, this is my purpose. This is, I'm not telling her mother that we just stood there and did nothing because we were afraid of blood, So thank God she was fine. What happened? She was eating pizza, and when the seizure hit, she was a 7th grader, and her head fell down to the table, and her chin. So the blood was everywhere. She was shaking. The blood was everywhere. But that's 17 years of many stories like that. So for me, I didn't walk away from education. If you see in my videos where I say I quit, I always put a question mark because I'm like people always say,
you just never know when. You never know. You might want to come back. You just never know. You leave the door open.
And the thing too is this: my path is a path. Like again, if you had told me in 2005 I'll be a principal, I'd have been, you lying. If you had told me in 2004 I'll be a teacher, you're lying. Our path is like I'm a man of faith, and God will direct every step we take, and I really believe that. And wherever I'm needed is where I'm going to be. And right now where I'm at, there's a new mission for me, and I feel it, and it's formulating. So I have no worries about leaving. But I didn't leave. If listen, bro, if you know how many people still call me, ask me, hey, what would you do about this? What would you do about that? What would you do about this? Bro, remember that you had that problem in your school? How did you do that? Till this day. Yesterday I was on the phone yesterday morning at 4:45 talking to a principal intern working on her paper, because I'm also coaching principal interns at Columbia. Like I can't really walk away, because again, I said in education I found my purpose, but now I'm exploring other angles of that purpose. It's not always going to be in the classroom or in the school building. Education is expansive. It's all these points in education you can influence that actually ultimately influence what happens in the building.
Preach. And I see as you're doing a lot of different things after resigning, one of which is your podcast. So before we get into the lightning round and close things out, I want to give you a chance to talk about the sneaker principle. So what can people know about the podcast and what inspired it?
So the Sneaker Principle podcast was born April of 2020. Is it April? No, I'm sorry, not April. Why do I keep saying April? It's not April. It was it was April. No, it was April. Because my son was born in March.
Right at the start of the pandemic.
Yes, my son was born March 3rd. 2 weeks later, there was no more school. Everybody was virtual. We were trying to figure out what was going on. And for somebody who is like, I'm up early in the morning out the building, running around all day long, to be sitting in a house in front of a computer, my anxiety was like at level 10. And I had been exploring with YouTube. I was creating content on YouTube around financial literacy and stuff like that, and credit cards and like stuff. Just like me, I didn't share this part. In college, I majored in, I received my degree in film and media studies. So I've always been heavy into technology, into media. So so I was playing with YouTube, for about 2 years, off and on. So during the pandemic, I found myself listening to a lot of podcasts. Like in the morning, I'll just have it in my ear as I'm doing work, whatever the case is in the house. And I was like, you know what, this is kind of cool. This podcasting thing is kind of cool. And I just like, when you sit in the house and you have a little bit of money and a lot of time in your hands, I'm like, okay, I need a mic, right? So I was buying a mic. I need this. I got this. I got different things together. And I was like, you know what? This is my side project. I'm going to start a podcast. And I had a friend of mine who had told me that, about a year or two prior, that you're the sneaker principal, because I do have my one major advice are sneakers. Grew up in LA and not being able to afford this and Jordans and all that stuff was not happening. All my shoes when I was in high school and in middle school was from Payless Shoe Store. And thank God I played football. I was kind of swole. So I was like, yo, say something. I'm gonna rock my Payless. And so, being an adult, having a little bit of money, a little bit more, access to extra funds, I buy a lot of sneakers. So a lot of my kids, they knew me for my what was on my feet. So this friend of mine was like, "You're the sneaker principal." So that became kind of a moniker for me. And I started this podcast, and then I was like, "Okay, what am I going to do with this podcast?" It's called a Sneaker Principal. I'm not going to talk about sneakers on the podcast. And my wife was the one who was like, "You know what? You should like interview your friends who are in education, because you're a principal." So I started like reaching out to friends of mine who were in education, who some of them were principals from other states, and just kind of interviewing them here and there. And it kind of took a life of its own. It didn't really have any real structure. And because again, I wasn't really taking it seriously. It was kind of like, I'm just doing, whatever comes to mind, and during the pandemic, I had so much more time to be consistent with it. And I remember things got interesting when a friend of mine said, "Hey, David Banks?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know David Banks." Like, yeah, he was a principal in my one of my old buildings that I was one of the schools I worked with. We shared a building with Eagle Academy, which is the school that David Banks founded, the Chancellor of New York City. So he was like, "Hey, David Banks, I talked to him about you, and he wouldn't mind being on your podcast." I was like, "Why would he want to be on my podcast? Like, what are you talking about? This is like bootleg." He's like, "Nah, he might be the next chancellor, so it might not be a bad thing." And I was like, "Okay." So he was on the podcast, and I was like, and people were like, "Yo, how'd you get this man on your podcast?" I was like, "I have no idea." Like, again, I always say, God's grace, and sometimes things just happen. And that was right around the time we got to school and everything else. And I'll be honest with you, things, I made a couple more episodes, focusing really on education. And then at the end of this past school year in June, I got him back on the podcast again. And I saw him at an event, and I joked around. I was like, "Hey," I was like, "Chancellor Banks, when you gonna crack on the podcast?" And he was like, "Brother, whenever." And I was like, "Come on, bro. I'm just playing. You're the chancellor now. I can't have you on the podcast." And he did it. He got back on there. But then that happened around the same time I was wrapping my career up. It was very clear that it was coming to an end. So since that episode, really, I think I did maybe 1 or 2 episodes, and I've been in waiting, like trying to figure out, like, now, how do I take this to another space?
That's right.
And it's just funny because actually tonight Eastern Standard Time here in New York at 10 o'clock, I'm going live. I'm changing the format of the podcast. It's going to be a call-in show now, where it's going to be kind of like a radio show. We're just going to talk education,
Oh, dope.
And I'll tell you, one of the reasons for that, thank you. It was an idea. It was an idea that came literally a few days ago. You know how you're waiting for an answer for something, and you just like, "I'm just going to wait. Just be still." One of my brothers, who is a principal, and I call all my colleagues who are principal, because I know struggle. I'm like, "You're all my brothers and sisters." Some of you might know to mess out of me sometimes for things you do, but I understand the struggle. And one of my brothers, he pulled me to the side at the conference and said, "Listen, what you doing with that podcast?" I was like, "Yo, bro, I'm trying to figure that out right now, because this is like, I'm not a principal anymore. So I even call it a sneaker principal." He was like, "No, leave it the way it is. But guess what? You did something on LinkedIn that changed the game for everybody. You gave everybody a space to start to think and talk about the things that we weren't willing to really think and talk about." He's like, "What if you allowed the podcast to be a space where people could just, even if they want to call it anonymously, and just talk about what they're going through in education?" And I was like, that's a good point. So I'm the kind of person where I'm just like, listen, if it sounds like a good idea, I'm going to do it. So tonight, I'm kicking it off where Sundays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 10 o'clock. I'm going to jump on. It's going to be an open live call show, and I'll present a topic. I'm just going to talk about it. I think that's a space that's extremely needed, because as a teacher, as a dean, as an AP, as a principal, on each of those levels, there's always those closed door conversations. Kwame, I know you've had those conversations where you're like, "Bro, I can't. What's going on here?" Is whispers, but nobody having conversations. And how do we move a system? So that's the thing with the podcast now. I'm going in this new direction, and I might be the only one there talking to myself. It's okay, but I think I really want to use my platform now to really have people talk, like really talk and engage in conversation and dialogue on not just the surface stuff. Let's stop complaining about, "Oh, this principal this and this teacher that." No, let's talk about, like we're doing here. What are the things that we need to do to move forward? Like, how do we impact the system? We can't, as especially people of color, keep saying the system is jacked up. Then what are we doing about it? Like, what are we doing about it? And I really want to create that space. So this new iteration of the Sneaker Principle podcast you know, we'll see, you know, but I'm excited about it because, again, the one thing I do have now that I didn't really have before is freedom. I don't work for the system anymore.
Oh, so
So
something's about to come out. A lot of
yeah,
stories about to come out now.
yeah. And again, you know, this is for my peoples. That's how I look at it. You know, this is for my kids. You know, my kids are 2 and 4 right now. One day they're going to be in the system. You know, I got to make sure that the system is better than it is right now for them.
That's right. Yeah, and that's inspiring, man. You and I off the air, we're gonna have to have some conversations about this new iteration because I'm actually in the process of doing some retooling for my own podcast, switching up the format and everything. So another time we'll definitely have to have a conversation because that's inspiring right there.
No, for sure.
Um, yeah. But Uche, man, thank you so much for coming on. Like, this has been a dope conversation. We can keep going on and on for days because there's so much we could cover. But to close us out, I do have a lightning round question,
Okay.
and it's one that sometimes can stump our guests, but I think you'll do a pretty good job with this one.
Okay.
So, if you have a dinner and you're inviting 3 guests, dead or alive, who would they be?
Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, the author of Things Fall Apart, fellow Igbo
Yep.
man, and the first book that I read from cover to cover, you know, and I was a struggling reader. When I was in primary 4, I read that book, and I've read that book like maybe 10 times over the course of my life.
Wow.
Tupac Shakur, he had a profound impact on my life as a young man, and this whole notion. I mean, there's all this controversy around him, but the one thing he had that as a child I didn't have, and I now exercise unapologetically, is my voice.
Mm,
You know, that brother spoke, and he spoke his truth. He wasn't always right, but that level of boldness to say, no, this is who I'm going to be, to me was just amazing. Um,
yes.
so those two for sure. Number 3 fluctuates. I have so many names, people going through my mind right now, but right now in this moment, right now, if you had to tell me number 3 right now, um, um, Emirs Joseph Escadon, Nipsey Hussle. Nipsey was just man. I just got through his biography, and as a young man who grew up in Los Angeles, and my mother, and he was a Rolling 60s Crip. My mother's store was in that hood, Rolling
Wow.
60s, and every where the marathon store is, everything about it. Like, I'm like, when people talk about it, I'm like, visually I know exactly where it is. And then then the other thing too is him being African as well. His father was from Eritrea, you know. So his story and how much of his Africanness impacted his success, like those things are very like for me, I just have so many more questions for that young man, and it's unfortunate that he passed the way he passed, you know, except with Pac. You know, I feel like when you're doing something amazingly well and you're doing great things for your community, all of a sudden, you know, the forces that be, whether they're spiritual or flesh, come after you. You know, but I think it's our responsibilities to push those narratives and let our kids know. Like you talked about earlier about how a lot of our stories are being erased and being transformed. There's also a lot of new stories that you can't erase, you can't transform. They're too
That's
recent.
right.
We have to make sure that those stories are being told as well. So
Yes.
it's funny. All 3 of mine are all passed away. And Chinua Achebe was just he taught me about my Igbo-ness, about my tribe and my culture and who I am. So
Yeah. And all 3 powerful men and their legacies still live on to this day.
yes,
So, one last thing, of course, can't let you leave without telling people how they can connect with you on social media, but also how they can subscribe to the Sneaker Principle podcast, because we gotta make sure they hit that up.
No, definitely. For the podcast, if you just type in, thankfully it's such a unique name, and I'm the only one, so there's no copycats. The Sneaker Principle. If you type that in, you're gonna find me all through. If you Google that, but then I have my website that which is thesneakerprinciple.com. All my social media is there as well, and but yeah, and then just also my name, Uche Njoku. It's funny now because when you type in Uche Njoku, I think I'm number 1 now on Google, so that's kind of dope.
All right, there you go, man.
Yeah,
that's growth.
Yes, sir. Yes,
But,
sir.
hey, but listen, brother, it's been a pleasure having you on. We might have to bring you back again for part 2, because there's still a whole lot of things that we didn't get a chance to cover, but it's all good. It just gives us the opportunity to connect again.
Anytime. And we gotta make. I know. There's a huge time difference. I gotta get you on the podcast as well.
Oh yeah,
So,
for sure, man. Just say when, and we'll make it happen.
All right, for sure.
All right, man. You have a good rest of the day.
All right, brother. Be well. Peace.
All right, thank you. All right, good people. So we're about to end another episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live. And as always, wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. We're going to do this again another time. Peace out, y'all.